I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for everybody who loves stories about interesting people and events told by those who uncovered them from within their own family trees. This, we hope, will inspire you to discover and celebrate your history and your story. The Nothnagle Log Home is an historic log cabin located near the Nehaunsey Creek in Gibbstown, Gloucester County, New Jersey. The cabin was built by Finnish settlers in the mid-17th century using tongue and groove construction without the use of any nails. It is considered to be one of the oldest log cabins of its type in its original location in the United States. In addition to its early Finnish residents, the Nothnagle Cabin has served as a home for tenant farmers, a butcher shop, smokehouse, and a dairy business. Over the past 50 years, the cabin, along with its adjoining 18th century house, has been owned by Doris Rink and her late husband, Harry. The Rinks have given the cabin much love and care throughout the years and took great pleasure in sharing the cabin's history with thousands of visitors. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, we'll be speaking with Doris Rink, who will be sharing the history of the Nothnagle Cabin, the people who built it, and some curious and historic finds discovered by Doris and her husband. The Nothnagle Log House is listed on both the National and New Jersey State Historic Registers. I'd now like to welcome Doris Rink to our show. Welcome, Doris.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'm very excited to be speaking with you again, because actually my wife Kelly and I went down to visit you last week. So this is really something I've been looking forward to. So Doris, for the last 50 years, you have lived in the Nothnagle Log House, which is believed to be the oldest log cabin still in its original place where it was built, perhaps in the country. Is that true?
That's true.
Tell us a little bit about what you know about the Nothnagle Log House. When was it built and who built it?
The Nothnagle Log House was built somewhere in the 1600s. I would imagine somewhere between 1650, and our county was founded in 1686. And the first real estate taxes were paid on this property to Gloucester County in 1686. And the cabin had to be built sometime within that era. Nobody knows exactly because the settlers, they had problems surviving, let alone trying to document history. And we have found that this is the only full dovetail constructed cabin in the Northwestern Hemisphere. And it's made without a single nail. The corners are notched and the roof rafters are put together with trunnel pins. There's never been a single nail in it when it was originally built by Finnish. Sweden ruled Northern Europe for 500 years. So a lot of people who say they're Swedish are actually Finnish. And so this was a technique used by the Finns. And another reason we know that it was a Finn is because the Finns do not do things symmetrical. So when you look at the fireplace, it's not the same on both sides. It's built at an angle in the corner of the cabin. One of the special features of the Nothnagle Log Cabin is when it was built without a single nail, there are rows of logs that can be removed without interfering with the construction of the end, and that would let ventilation in.
So these settlers, you're talking about mid-17th century, they came from what is now Finland, Sweden. There's actually a town nearby called Swedesboro, very close by. So I'm wondering if many people know that there were Swedish or Scandinavian settlements in New Jersey.
In this area, yes, because we have areas like Rapapa, Bridgeport, Swedesboro, and some of Cumberland County. And they all know that the Swedes were here because they had built granaries and things like that of their type construction. And because of the temperature in this area, most of them had to migrate on to Minnesota and things where it was more conducive to what they were used to.
Yeah. Do you know what prompted these settlers to come to New Jersey?
They wanted to come to develop other land, and when they came in here, they were able to get land documented to them, so no one could take ground away from them. Like in other areas, in maybe Finland, Sweden, they would clear off ground for farming and things, and then it would be not granted over to them. But over here, they could have their own property once they got it cleared.
Was there a large group of settlers?
Well, they had, the ships were much smaller in those days. So the first one that came over was called Nothnagle, and it had landed at the rocks in Wilmington, Delaware in 1638. So there were several expeditions after that. And when you think about them crossing the Atlantic in March, their ship was badly damaged when they got here. So they were lucky that they even were able to finish the expedition, because most people wouldn't tackle a project like that in March.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about these small groups of settlers arriving in this, the woods, and the amount of work that had to be done just to clear the woods to build someplace to live, and battling the weather at the same time, and whatever hardships there were so many. You got to give a lot of credit to the bravery and the fortitude of these settlers, don't you?
Yes, because they really didn't know what to expect when they got here. They had to bring their own tools because they knew we wouldn't have hammers and so forth here. And one thing about the Swedes and the Finns, they had a good rapport with the American Indians once they got here.
Mm-hmm. So that was very helpful. Now, just to back up a little bit to clarify, so the Nothnagle Log House that we're talking about is located in Gibbstown, New Jersey, in Gloucester County. And it is so fascinating when Kelly and I visited last week to think of what it must have looked like back then, and that we were actually standing in a cabin that was there when, the original settlers from Europe were there. And we just got this sense of history just coming out of the walls at us. It was so interesting. Tell us, one other thing. Now, the location of the cabin, where it's at, it's close to a creek. Is that why they built it there, do you think?
Yes, they're just close enough to the Nehaunsey. That's Nehaunsey, an Indian name. They came up that creek, and then they knew exactly where to position the cabin so that they would be close to access for water, but yet they would be dry land for like farming and to build a cabin structure.
We're going to get into sort of the cabin structure a little more and the things inside of it, which are just really so cool. But I want to talk about you a bit. How did you come? Because I know you told me you are not from New Jersey originally. How did you come to live in this incredible historic house?
I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, on a farm about 10 miles from downtown Columbus. I went to Florida one year on a vacation. Harry had gone to Clearwater Beach, Florida for vacation. We met in Florida, and eventually we were able to get together, and we both had common interest in historic things and everything we did. And so we were married, and we began to look into the cabin and its importance, and to understand how it was built so long ago and still standing today.
Yeah, now there's a house built, your house that's built next to the cabin itself is also a very old structure. Can you tell us about that a bit?
Yes, first they built the cabin, then in 1753 they added addition onto that, and that was another fireplace that was put in, and then the latest addition was put on like 1900. And so we still have evidence in the new addition showing that it was also a log structure, and there was also a fireplace in there. So as new things came along, they gradually upgraded the living facility.
Do you have any thoughts on perhaps that the original settlers who built the cabin, whether that family stayed there for any length of time, or what might it have been a different family that built the addition?
Well, the Swedes and the Finns, they left this area after they were here, farmed and so forth, and they knew that it was hard for them to survive here. with the heat because they weren't acclimated to the warm weather. And so they went up to Minnesota and some of those other areas. And our county is known as under four flags. That was the Swedish, the Dutch, the British, and then the American Revolution. So it was easy for them to transfer this house from one family and one ethnic group to another because it was like conducive for farming, for dairy, and for survival. And being close to Philadelphia, they had access to sell their goods, their furs, their tobacco, and whatever they would raise. And it was easy for them to go down the Nehaunsey Creek to the Delaware River, get to Philadelphia, up to National Park, and then down to Wilmington. So they had a good route to travel. And eventually an old Swedes church was built in Swedesboro. And one of the ministers got killed crossing, and that's when Philadelphia preacher didn't have to travel anymore over to New Jersey to do services. They had their own preacher, so he didn't have to make the treacherous. So the Delaware River was so important, but yet it was very, very rough because you didn't know what the weather condition was going to be. And their vessels, their boats, and their things that they transported the goods on, they were like quite fragile in those days.
Yeah, you talk about the water transportation was the way to go. I mean, pretty much all early settlements were based on water because it's the only way they could get across to different areas, because, going via land would have been terribly treacherous. As treacherous as the water could be, going across land would have been, so cumbersome and dangerous and all sorts of things. So it made sense to see that this cabin was built by this creek, and then that was access to the Delaware River. That's kind of cool. Now, when we walked into your house and we met you and your friend Christina, you were so hospitable to us, Doris. We really appreciated that. And the place just was filled with all sorts of historical items that just sort of, I don't know, just intrigued me. And I kind of got lost. You probably thought I was daydreaming, but I was just looking at all the things and feeling the history. And there's a few things within the cabin that I would like to ask you about. The first thing that stood out to me was the fireplace. It was just this gigantic fireplace, and in it were some old iron pots and tools and things like that. Can you tell us the history behind that fireplace and the things that were within it and the things it was made of?
Well, first thing, when you have a fireplace, first thing you have to have is bricks. So they came to this country knowing that they didn't have bricks possibly here. So they came as ballast on the ships. So they started in with the bricks for the fireplace. And it's a large fireplace because it was going to have to serve as a part of the corner. Is one of the reasons it's still standing today, because the British and the English, they put their fireplaces on a side wall. This one's in the corner. And that's one of the main factors that the cabin's still standing today, is because of that strong fireplace. And the tools that's in there, a lot of those came over on the ships when they came in the 17th century, because they did not know what was to expect. Actually, they brought axes and things like that. And to get to the ground where the cabin was built, they had to use the axes and saws and whatever they had to get rid of the trees so they could clear land in order to build the cabin.
Yeah, I think of that when you go on a long journey in a car now. We think that's a big deal, right? We're tired, we've been in the car a long time, and you just want to get out of the car and just flop down in the bed in the hotel or at home or what have you. When you think of these travelers, these people coming from Europe, coming across the Atlantic, there was disease on board ships, there was danger of storms and all that. Then they get to where they want to be, and in some cases they've overshot or undershot where it was that they were planning on going. But there's no rest for the weary, because they had to start building and clearing right away. Just to think about that was incredible, because I saw a lot of tools in the cabin. And the fireplace, though, I would imagine they did all their cooking in it and it warmed the house. And what you're saying is that the way that the Swedes or Finns built the house was to make the fireplace part of a supporting wall of it. And that's why this particular cabin may have lasted much longer than many of the other ones that were built.
Yes, and not only the adults, but children in those days had to participate in doing things for daily living. And they would probably carry the water maybe from the creek or cutting wood. And in the summertime, of course, they couldn't use the fireplace because of the heat, so they would have to do their cooking outside. And in colonial days, a lot of children lost their lives because of open fires and things around.
You know, we live near Morristown, New Jersey, and there's a place called Jockey Hollow, and it's where Washington troops were, I think, over 2 winters. They were sort of stationed there, and they've got some replica huts, soldier huts there, and they appear to be very drafty and cold. The cabin that you have lived in the last 50 years, it wasn't really small, but it certainly wasn't that big either. Do you know what the dimensions of the cabin are?
Somewhere around 16 by 22, and that was considered large for those days.
Yeah, a whole family would be in there. So you got a lot of people.
Possibly 6 children and the parents. And the parents and small children would sleep downstairs in bedrolls, and then the other ones would sleep upstairs on the second level.
Not a lot of privacy. And also, I would imagine that if somebody got sick, they all got sick right away, right?
Naturally, yes, because they didn't have sanitations like we have.
No, obviously they were vulnerable to disease and things like that. But the pots and the implements for the fireplace, didn't somebody come and say that perhaps these dated back to the 1500s, some of those things?
Like the axe and some of the cooking things, ladles, a lot of things had to come over with them when they came on the ships, because they had to be able to cut down trees even to get to where they would want to build.
Now, in the earliest days when the cabin was built, would it have been a dirt floor?
It was a dirt floor until 1753, yes. They would put straw over the dirt floor, and then they would gather that up as it got soiled and dispose of that and put fresh straw down.
That is interesting. And so the floorboards go down in the mid 18th century, and they're there an awful long time until your husband decided he needed to shore up the floor a little bit. Can you tell us that story?
Yes, he had all the floorboards taken up, and the archaeological people at the University of Pennsylvania suggested that he sift all the dirt down for 22 inches, which he found a lot of artifacts and things by doing that. And he was an engineer. So he said, well, when I put this floor back together, Doris, we're going to have to think about when it goes back, because once it goes back, it's done for a long time. So he reinforced it with a thin layer of concrete to keep the moisture out. And then he did concrete pilings underneath the beams to strengthen it. So a historian walked in here and said, gee, I thought I'd be walking in on like a saggy floor and squeaky and this, that, and the other. But it's very solid. And it was tongue and groove when it was originally made. So that makes for a tight floor too. And that was a tremendous job to do back in the 1750s. To make a tongue and groove.
Yeah, when your husband decided to shore up the floor, was it sagging? Did it seem like it was going to collapse or anything?
No, not at all, because the floorboards were loblolly pine, and so they were a good strong wood.
Right, right. So you mentioned some artifacts were found underneath that floor, and this sort of blew me away when I heard about the big find that your husband had. Can you tell us about what he found?
Well, in the corner, it's in the area where they would go to the upstairs by a straight ladder. And he saw this and he thought maybe it was a dead animal or something like that. And he kept digging and he got it out. And here it was a boot. And in those days when they had dirt floors, they couldn't go outside and dig in the wintertime and bury things. So a lot of things were buried under the dirt floor. And so this was a boot, and it's put together with wooden pegs. So we know it has to be pre-1750. And it's in amazing condition for those age. But and the left shoe's the same as the right. We only found one boot, but if they would wear out one shoe more than the other, then they would interchange them.
You showed me the boot, and it's in a little case, and we're gonna, on our YouTube channel, we're gonna post a picture of the boot that we saw. And it was so interesting to think the last person to have that boot on their foot was dated back to, 25 years before the American Revolution, at least. It was on somebody's foot. And the thing is that it looked in pretty good shape to be throwing out, frankly.
It was, but yet with the wooden pegs and things, they didn't have really good ways to repair the soles on the shoes and things.
Okay, definitely. Now, what about also a coin?
He was working behind the fireplace, and he put his crowbar down, and he heard a ting, and so he thought, gee, it was something with a squirrel's nest, and he wasn't sure what it was. So he found it was an 1803 large cent penny, and it wasn't in great shape, but yet it was still recognizable by the date.
You just think of those were different generations of people who left those artifacts there, and how did it feel being the owner of a historic place like that, to know there were so many different people from different eras living and working and, sadly dying in that house, and good times and bad, all those generations? How did that feel to you and your husband living there like that?
Well, it made us feel good because both of us really wanted to make this cabin work and to remain. And that really kept us going, because we thought if people hadn't done it back in the 1600s and 1700s, here we were in the 1900s and 2000, that we had to put every ounce of effort that we had into preserving this for future generations, because we're adamant about people knowing who they are, where they came from, how they lived, and how they look to the future.
I love that. Doris, when your friend Christina reached out to us to tell us about your cabin, your historic cabin, it just fit so perfectly with our podcast, because we're about stories, keeping history alive. And, your family, your husband's family, had a history there, and so many others, and you're keeping it alive with stories. And as we're doing today, just looking around inside that cabin, we saw some really cool cabinets that had been built in the cabin. And I thought to myself, I'm no archaeologist, I'm not a big expert on furnishings or anything, but I thought those cabinets look really, really old, but I don't think they were original to the original cabin. And I asked you about them, and we took some pictures of them. Can you tell us about those?
There was a cabinet that was built custom made for the cabin, and this cabinet had to be made in around 1750 when they did the remodeling. And one of the things that I'm impressed about it, when they built that cabin, the cabinets, they were built to last, because they're very strong. And there was dairies and different meat processing companies and things that functioned in that cabin. And so they had really been used, and they're still in good, sturdy condition. They weren't just put together with like a tinker toy. They were built to last.
Totally solid. And also solid were the two doors that I looked at. Just, I can't explain to you just the thought that I have. I get kind of weird on this stuff. When I look at those doors, front and back doors, and thinking how many people walked in and out of those doors over the centuries, and what they looked like, what they were doing, what their everyday was like. There's two things about the doors that you told me. One is that they don't likely date back to the original cabin, that they were put on later, but still a very long time ago. And the other thing is that what is now the front door would have been the back door, and the back door would have been the front door. Can you talk about those things?
Yes, it's tradition for the Finns to have their fireplace to the right as you go in the front door. And we were always very amazed at why it's the way it was. But a library was constructed back in the 1990s right next door to us. And when they built it, the foundation for that, we saw a vein of oyster shells and it went behind our house. So that shows the oyster shell road went behind the cabin instead of in what we use for the front now. Because they put in like paved roads like later, but they use the oyster shell road.
Now the road, what is the name of the road that goes through what's now the front or by the front of the cabin?
It's a Swedesboro Road, and that road goes from Paulsboro, New Jersey to Swedesboro.
Okay. To your knowledge, was that a very old road? Has that been there a long time?
Yes, because Paulsboro is more situated right along the Delaware River, and so there had to be a lot of traffic back and forth from Swedesboro to Paulsboro using that road.
Right. It's a busy road. So, but during the years, the cabin was, as we said, there's many families came through it, but it also served as a butcher shop at one point, didn't it, Doris?
Yes, people actually resided in the cabin up until 1918 for a residence. That was tenant farmers lived there at that time because the Nothnagles had the bigger house attached to it. So when they vacated living there, it was used as a butcher shop and a meat and milk producing place. They had a wagon that would travel around town in the area selling their meat and dairy products.
So the actual cabin became a butcher shop after 1918?
Yes.
Okay.
It was known as Greenbrier Farms at that time. I have information because this area was just, when the first settlers came here, it was just briars all over the place. And so when they used it for their dairy, they called it Greenbrier Farms. So this was known as Greenbrier.
Greenbrier. Okay, definitely. So the butcher shop. So we're talking now starting around 1918 or so. When I looked up in the cabin across some of the rafters, I saw some looked like curved sticks of some sort. And you called it a gamble stick? Is that what you called it?
That's correct. And they would be in different sizes for like smaller veal and for beef and for hogs. And they have to, after they're slaughtered, they would hang them on there to like let them cure until they were able to process it and smoke the meat and so forth for preservation, because they didn't have freezers, refrigerators, and things like that. So they had to smoke it in order to preserve it.
You also showed me, I guess, underneath some, I don't know, it was plaster or what have you, but you and or Christina had showed me that there was some black, almost soot on the ceiling from where they used to smoke the meat, right?
Right.
So here's the thing. Not too many 17th century cabins around, huh? They're few and far between.
There may be older ones, but they're not this type construction because this was made without a single nail. It's a full dovetail construction, and the beams are like no ridge pole. They're put together with wooden trunnel pins. So there may be other ones, but they wouldn't be this type construction.
I see, but still, mid 17th century is incredible in its age, but and the whole thing without nails is incredible. But I think of the fact that you've got a big fireplace going on, got a lot of activity, a lot of people. It survives many, many years. It becomes a smokehouse where they're smoking meat. There's fire, there's wood, and you've got a situation where the place could easily burn down, you would think, right? Isn't it incredible to think how it survived all of that, over the years? Isn't that just, it's almost, it was meant to survive, to be an example of history to us, doesn't it?
Well, a lot of them would have fires behind the fireplaces and things too. Damage was done just from the heat alone without even having, flame fire.
Yeah, definitely. But seeing the soot on the ceiling was definitely very interesting. Now, over the years, you and your husband just took such good care. So it wasn't so much just luck or fate or what have you, but there was a lot of TLC put into it, a lot of love you and your husband put into this house. It also took a lot of skill, a lot of know-how, a lot of research. Can you talk about some of the restoration, preservation that you and your husband did over the many years that you've lived there, and maybe starting with the fireplace when your husband had to repair it. How did that happen? How did you do that?
Well, when you live in a place like this, it's like peeling sunburn. You just get in, you find out what's wrong, and then you resolve it. He was an engineer. He was a graduate of Drexel University, and he worked at Texaco Oil Refinery. So he had a lot of expertise in working and education and things like that. And he knew structurally what this cabin needed in order to survive. And he's the reason cabin's still standing today.
The bricks, though, did your husband research the bricks even?
Yes, we took a brick with us when we went to Sweden, and we matched it over in the area where the ships came from. And we saw an old fort over there, the very same brick. Matter of fact, we took a brick with us in our luggage, and we were actually able to see it, and we documented it with some historians over in Sweden.
That was certainly a good move, because that also sort of confirmed the fact those bricks were part of the ballast of the ship as well. And then, of course, you're keeping historical accuracy of the fireplace by using where the same bricks came from.
He sealed off the chimney in 3 spots because he didn't want anybody to ever try to attempt to do a fire in the fireplace, because the bricks just would disintegrate that much more.
Your husband was an engineer, and he did a lot of work on the cabin, but you had a huge part in it too. And you were taking me outside on the property and talking to me about the different trees that you had out, cherry trees. You talked about an old well that was out there. You're a person with a great passion for history and preserving history. So tell me about some of your projects that you personally worked on that you were the most fond of.
I really was concerned and interested in the construction of it. And when I would take the wheelbarrow with concrete in it, mix the concrete with the hoe, and then Harry would put it in and so forth. Growing up on a farm, I was used to all kinds of work, but this was really a work of passion.
I think that's great. And you mentioned the cherry trees, and that you've made some cherry pies in your time. Is that true?
That's true. I love to cook and bake, and Harry would just stand there. He couldn't wait till the pie came out of the oven.
When we spoke, you mentioned that at some time in the future, you might make us a pie.
Possibly, if I can find out what your favorite is. My grandson just absolutely loves my pecan pie and cherry pie. One of his favorite was lemon pie. And of course, living in New Jersey, it's a peach pie and also apple.
Well, they all sound great, but I'm partial to pecan pie. That's my favorite. And Kelly likes peach pie.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. And now I also make Thanksgiving. I like a mincemeat pie. Now there's few people that like mincemeat pie, but I have a couple special tricks that I use in mine that nobody else uses in a mincemeat pie. And people who never would eat mincemeat pie before, after they taste mine, they said, gee, this is good.
I'll have to try that, because I'm not a big fan of mincemeat. We used to have it often. My mom, I don't know if it's an English thing, but my mom was from England, and mince pie was something we often had with our Christmas, usually Christmas and Thanksgiving time.
Right.
And I'd smother it with vanilla pudding.
Oh, well, I don't kill the taste of the mincemeat pie with vanilla pudding.
That's because it's good, right?
I don't want to brag about my own cooking. I don't do that.
So there's been a lot of events that you've held in this cabin. You mentioned, I think there were 4 weddings in the cabin. Can you tell us about
4 weddings? Yes, we've had 4 weddings in the cabin. Harry and I were married right in front of the fireplace in the log cabin in 1973.
And we could picture that. We saw the picture you had in the cabin of you and Harry, and that's a real personal connection to that cabin. At Christmas time, you've decorated the cabin.
For 18 years, we used a different country and decorated in their traditions and used ornaments and things that they would have. And in 1988, we had it Swedish, and we had a large Christmas tree out back that was decorated. And we had a St. Lucia, the girl with the real candles, and she came in the cabin and lit the tree in there. And we used straw ornaments and things indicative of the Swedes. And we had the year we did Italy, we had like a moss with the nativity scene. Estonia, when we had that, we had a big open Estonia Bible there because that was their focus, is to use like the Bible with the Christmas things. And the whole town learns a new history behind different countries. And we had different dancers, Hungarian dancers and things like that. They'd perform either to church across the street from us or back at the school. And so, because the United States of America is such a melting pot of people, that we just really wanted to spread traditions other than just what people were used to for Christmas, to really put some extra meaning behind Christmas.
It's so educational for people to learn about the different influences. Of course, there's so many cultures, as you said, a melting pot here in the United States. But for many years, many years, you and your husband really opened your cabin free of charge for people to come and enjoy history, to learn about history. I really have to commend you and Harry on doing that. It wasn't about a profit thing. It was about really spreading education to people, as hard as it can be to do that without charging. It's really difficult, but I know many people must have benefited over the years, as we did, to come there and just feel the history and hear the stories, which are the basis of really just learning about different cultures and how people settled here. And there's some engineering involved. There's, I guess, just a study of human nature and human fortitude and things like that. And also ingenuity. When you think of all those tools and how they made do with very, very little, I think it's tremendous what you did. You had all kinds of tour groups come through there, didn't you?
Yes, we did. The year of New Sweden, which would have been 1988, we had somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 that came through. They came by busloads even. And it's always been a passion of Harry and mine that if anybody would like to see the cabin, we don't want them to ever be able to not do it because of the cost of the admission.
Doris, during your time as owners of this wonderful cabin, you were able to meet with some Swedish dignitaries, weren't you?
Swedish, Finnish, yes, and several nationalities. We've had ambassadors here. We've gone to other functions where the King and Queen of Sweden have been there, but they've never visited the cabin. But we had consul generals and so many people, and it's been nice to have them. But everyday ordinary people, they're just as important to us to see the cabin as somebody that's got clout.
Amen to that. And you and Harry just did a wonderful job opening your cabin and opening history up to anybody who wanted to come and learn, right?
Right.
Do you have any particular fondest memories of the cabin, other than obviously you were married in it? Are there any particular fond memories? Are there just too many to name?
Just we would have different school groups come through, and we would interchange with the Fort Mercer up in National Park. And it was nice because in those days, school children could come on trips, but now, of course, with pandemic and all that, they don't do that anymore. But we would have hundreds of children through here. And that was so memorable. And now, many times people will say, I came through this cabin as a child, and this is my son, and I want him to be able to see this cabin too. So that makes you feel good to think a person as an adult want to carry on a tradition with their own children. And I think it's important that this history be kept alive. Not that you deal in the past, but you really need to know the past in order to really appreciate and know our future, because we are so lucky in this country that people don't realize what bloodshed was given to make this country what it is.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, first of all, The cabin isn't the only thing you do that you're interested in. You're very history-minded in general for your community, and you're involved in the community. What other types of things have you done as far as your interest in history and serving the community?
Well, I like to get into different projects. For 10 years, I served as the Culture and Heritage Commission and the Arts Council for Gloucester County. And that really opened up the doors for like a lot of exposure to not only history, but arts, and how they're both such an integral part of people's daily lives. And we need to keep that alive.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So Doris, tell us, what is going to happen with the Nothnagle house? What do you feel is going to and should happen at this point with this amazing piece of history?
Just that I'm 80 years old now. Harry was 89 when he passed away. We have never turned anybody away from seeing the cabin. What's going to happen to it in the future is going to be up to whoever's the owner, and if they love and respect the cabin, which anybody that sees it would or could or should. And I've done everything that I can do. Harry did everything that he can do. And now it's time for the new generations to step in and carry on the duty. And it's a duty to really keep the place going.
I like that.
And living here for 50 years, I never knew being Charles Nothnagle, who owned this place. But I really feel like I know them because I'm living the life that they lived. And so in the future, I would like to see it be accessible to people, even though they just have to see it from the outside. They don't have to go in the inside, just see it from the outside and reflect back what it took to make this and to keep it going.
Very well said. Well, Doris, this has been just a wonderful conversation, and you're just a tremendous lady. You've done so much for the history community and New Jersey history, and you're an Ohio person, and look what you've done for New Jersey history over these many, many decades. I know all the things that you're involved in, you're going to keep just really contributing so much. So I want to thank you for having Kelly and me down to visit you and to see this fabulous cabin. And I wish the very best for you and the cabin in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's really been a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And I don't regret putting any of that into the cabin because I just feel like it was my duty. And Harry and I had a very good marriage for 49 years. We worked together. It wasn't like his project or my project. It was our project.
Oh, God bless you. And thank you. And we'll be seeing you soon because I want to come down for that pecan pie. Thanks, Doris.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your History, Your Story. You can connect with us on Facebook and YouTube at Your History, Your Story, or on Instagram and Twitter at YHYS Podcast. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, or a story to tell. Be well and God bless.